color. You've got the river, you've got people. The trees are changing color, so it makes it.
How did you get your start in photography?
Well, believe it or not, it was happenstance, and it's tied to water resources department. So back in the mid '90s, we had a hydrographics tech who was really good at his job. He was great at keeping the stations upgraded and working on them. I mean, he was really meticulous, and he was retiring. And my boss told me, "Why don't you go take a picture of a gauging station for him, and we'll give it to him for retirement." I said, "Okay." So, not knowing anything, we had an old Pentax K1000, totally manual camera. And I knew a little bit about photography. I knew that you had to have a tripod, and I knew, a few things, basically. So, I took this manual camera and the tripod out to the Benham Falls gauge, and I started taking pictures. Of course, back then it was film, and developed the film, and it came back, and the pictures were amazing. And I was totally floored that I actually took some great photos. And then I began to wonder, well, what was it that made those photos great, and what did I do with the camera? And from there, I just started engaging in all kinds of photography, and it really became a big interest of mine. Okay.
Can you tell us about your gear?
All right. Well, when I first started out, digital hadn't exploded, so it was all film. And if folks have shot film, you have to realize that the instant feedback with digital cameras was not there. So when you went out to a shoot, you were limited to 24 or 36 shots per roll of film, and you didn't know your results until you got it back from the developer. And so you have to understand what you're doing, you make assumptions, you try to capture the best light, and then the feedback didn't come till days later. And so you had to be disciplined in what you do, and you were limited on your shots, and your instant feedback was not there. So that aspect of learning how to shoot film made you go slower, made you analyze what you were doing, and taught you how to capture images with a limited amount of time and media, so to speak. And so that was where I got my first start. So I started out with some basic film cameras. I progressed up to a professional level film camera, and then continued on that for a number of years until about the mid-2000s when I switched to digital. And once I switched to digital, it was just a whole new ball game. You could just do so much more. The instant feedback of your shots, you can make adjustments on the fly, all those sort of things. Actually reinvigorated my enthusiasm to photography. So one of the sayings that I've heard is that the best camera to have is the one that you have with you all the time. If you have a camera that weighs 10 pounds with its gear and it's too hard to lug around, you're not going to take it with you. So a point and shoot, or today in 2020, the camera on an iPhone is absolutely amazing. I knew a professional photographer that when she saw the images you can make with an iPhone, she said, "I'm giving up. I'm not going to do this anymore because there's so many folks out there that can take amazing photos with a phone." So whether you have a phone, whether you have a point and shoot, or whether you have a digital SLR, which is what this is, it's a Canon EOS 7D, and it is probably about 8 years old, but it shoots roughly 20 megapixels. It shoots raw pictures as well as even automatic programming. So you can do, you're not limited with creativity on this camera, as well as it has a built-in flash, which comes in handy sometimes. So digital SLR somewhat mirrors the old film cameras because you've got a mirror, a mechanism, and a shutter that has to open up and let the light in. So the reason why I like it is because of its ergonomic feel for my hands. I tried shooting with point and shoots, and there were two things about them that I just could not stand. One of which was the lag between when you released the shutter and took the picture was so long that oftentimes I missed what I was shooting. And the other thing was they just didn't fit in my hand. I couldn't hold them well enough or get stable enough to get the shot that I wanted. And then looking through the viewfinder is one of the keys that I like because it isolates your image. You are able to frame your picture much better when you've got just one eye looking through the frame and you've got your what you want to shoot. It's just a much better way of doing things. So I prefer the digital SLR over any other media at this point in time. A few of the lenses I have here, which you can go crazy with lenses, but there is one key fundamental in photography, is that the lenses are actually more important than the camera. They call it the glass, or how you capture light is key in everything. So a few of my lenses here, my standard zoom lens. Canon has a series of lenses called their L series, which is their professional level series. This lens actually has autofocusing and image stabilization, as well as its zoom lens. So it runs from 24 millimeters to 105 millimeters. So it's got a fairly wide range, and it's my most used lens by far is that 24 to 105 millimeter range. A little tidbit of information is that the human eye's equivalent focal length is 50 millimeters. So if you have a 50 millimeter lens, basically you're capturing what the human sees looking straight ahead. And I just so happen to have a 50 millimeter. So I would, as advice for starting out, this is called a prime lens. And a prime lens is one that is a fixed focal length. This one happens to be a 50 millimeter, and it has got the widest aperture is f1.4. So in lingo, it's a fast lens. So it's able to capture a lot of light. If we want to stop and talk a little bit about focal length. The focal length of a lens dictates how much scenery you can see. A wide angle lens might be 15, 16 millimeters, and then a telephoto lens could be the 200 or 300 millimeter range, which, if you're watching sports and you see the guys on the sideline with those big long lenses, those are big telephoto lenses, 400, 500 millimeters. They're quite expensive, quite heavy, but they zero in on the shot that you want your subject matter. So it really isolates it, and that's kind of a key fundamental of taking photography, is isolating your subject. And you can do that by varying your distance from the subject, or using a different type of focal length lens. And a zoom lens is the easiest way to capture those images where you want to zoom in on your subject. The last lens that I'll show is this is a zoom telephoto lens. So it goes from a 70 millimeter to a 200 millimeter, and both this zoom the telephoto and my walk around lens are both fixed at f4 aperture. So no matter what zoom length you're at, it retains that f4 aperture. So I've said aperture a few times. What does that mean exactly? How the camera and photography is set up is you take the focal length of the lens and you divide by the aperture setting. So as an example, if you had a 100 millimeter lens and you had an f2 aperture, you take 100 millimeters, divide by 2. That tells you that you have a 50 millimeter opening on your lens. So 50 millimeters is about that big. So you can imagine how much light an f2 100 millimeter lens can capture. It's incredible, really. Typical consumer lenses run from a f3.5 to an f5.6. So they're called slower lenses. And that's why when I talk about a prime lens being a 1.4, this lens is incredibly sharp and incredibly able to capture light. So if you're trying to decide what kind of lens to buy, I would, instead of one of those cheap consumer zoom lenses, I would buy a prime lens, maybe even a 28 millimeter f1.8, a couple $100, and you've got a really good lens that'll take really sharp photos. So that's key, is sharp photos. I have it's a fancy remote release. It's called an intervalometer. So it can take increments, pictures, a whole bunch of different things. These are key also for keeping your lens steady. A key component of landscape photography is your tripod. So when I first started out, I had an aluminum Bogen Manfrotto lens, and I would get up in the morning in the dark, and I would snowshoe up Tumalo Mountain where the temperature could be 0 degrees. And I had this aluminum tripod, and my hands would literally stick to the tripod, and it was so cold. So it really made for a miserable experience. So after using that tripod for a while, I decided to upgrade to carbon fiber, and this is a Gitzo 6X carbon fiber tripod, which is top of the line. You can't get better. But saying that, if you want to do landscape photography or even portrait photography, you have to have a tripod. It's an essential part of the gear makeup. Is along with your camera, your lenses, a tripod is key. So you and I can't emphasize this enough, you don't want to skimp on a tripod. You don't want it to be flimsy. You don't want it to move around. You want it to be stable and solid and strong. And if you can, go with carbon fiber because it's light. One of the things with photography is you carry all this gear around here. It gets kind of heavy, and having a light tripod as well as the essential gear is key. You don't want to be lugging around a whole bunch of stuff you never use. Something that you can use and bird photographers use a lot are these tele-extenders or doublers. This one happens to be a 1.4x extender. So what this does is it multiplies the focal length of the lens that you're using by 1.4. So for instance, this 70 to 200 lens becomes roughly a 110 to 280 millimeter lens by using this extender. The downside is that you have a little bit of loss of your picture quality, and then your lens speed, the aperture, drops down about a half a stop. So you've got a slower lens. So you have to be careful with these. Like I said, bird photography, photographers use these a lot. It's to get that extension of the lens and your subject matter in the major portion of your lens frame. So let's see. This last thing is a Giotto rocket blaster, and what it does is when you have your lens, you have some dirt on your lens. You don't want to blow on it because you'll get spit and saliva on the lens, and you cause additional problems. With this, it's an air blower. You hold the lens and blow it off. You can blow the dust off. Key is to keep dust and dirt out of your film, or excuse me, out of your camera and out of your lenses, because you have a piece of dirt on your lens, you could have some kind of speck in your picture, and that can detract from the quality of your picture. So covering all this gear, you can go crazy. Some lenses are very expensive, so you know, if you're really into photography, you can spend a whole lot of money. But if you just like shooting with your phone, you can use it. So there's the whole range of from very inexpensive to breaking the bank. So you can go either way. So I've got to stop now.
What is the blue object?
The blue object here is a filter. And so this filter is what's called a circular polarizer. And filters come in all variety of different colors and purposes. The most common is this circular polarizer. What that does is it allows you to diminish or eliminate all kinds of glare off of shiny surfaces. So if you're shooting a vehicle and it's got a lot of chrome on it, or if you're shooting water, you can use this polarizer to reduce that glare and actually see into the water if that's the shot you want to take. So there's neutral density filters, which I've used a few times, and they're great for if you want to shoot water scenes or a waterfall and it's bright light out, and your shutter speed is too fast to get that silky look to the water. You put a neutral density filter on, and what that does is reduces the amount of light that's hitting your camera, and then you can have a longer shutter speed. So, you know, 1/30th of a second, 1/5 of a second type shutter speeds, even up to a second, depending on how dark that neutral density filter is. So filters can also be a means to protect the front element of the lens. So instead of, if you drop it or hit it or something, the filter takes the brunt of the force rather than the lens, the front element of the lens, which can save you a lot of money if you happen to crack the front of the lens.
Okay. You're killing.
Okay.
Where are good places to shoot photos?
So, shooting a photo is kind of up to the photographer. We're sitting near the Old Mill District in Bend and on the bluff above the Deschutes River. And I look around and I see architecture, I see trees, leaves, there's sunlight filtering through the branches on some of the trees. And then if you look out into the distance there, you've got some aspens changing color, you've got the river, you've got people, the trees are changing color, so it makes a great setting for multiple types of photography. I'm most interested in landscape photography, so I really get jazzed up when I go out and shoot landscapes. Typically, landscape photography is done in the early morning or in the evening when the light is at the lowest level, so you don't have really harsh light. So a couple things about light. There's soft light, which is, it's a cloudy day and you're in a forest. You have the difference between the light and dark spots is reduced. Whereas if it's a bright sunny day and you're in shadow, you can have really, really harsh light or hard light. And landscape photography, hard light does not really lend to great photos. You want softer light. So those subtle differences between shadows and light tend to have a better appeal to landscape photography. So those are some of the things that you need to keep in mind is what's the light setting? And if you're going to be a landscape photographer, you can't sleep in. You really have to get up and get out before the sun comes up. And then as the sun comes up, the light will change dramatically over just a few minutes. So that's one key. Another thing about what I want to mention is some advice I'd like to throw out there is I was heading up to Hoodoo at Sandy Am Pass one morning, and I was driving up on the east side of the mountain, and Mount Washington had this incredible light shining on it, filtered through clouds and fog, and there was snow on the ground. But my goal was to get to Hoodoo to take a shot at Hoodoo. And I drove by and I thought, man, that is such a great shot. I'll get it on my way back. And so I went up to Hoodoo, took some shots up there, and then when I came back, Mount Washington was totally engulfed in clouds, fog. The picture was completely gone. And that was over 20 years ago. And I still remember that to this day, that when there's an opportunity to take a photo, you stop and you get it, because light is changing all the time, and you always, if you have an opportunity, stop, get it, because it won't be back. In photography, there's a couple of principles that you want to keep in mind. A lot of the portrait photographers say that dead center is deadly, or it's dudley. It makes a dud of a picture. There's another thing that you also want to keep in is the rule of thirds. So if you break your shot up in thirds and you have a certain subject matter, you want to put it in one of the third quadrants of the picture instead of dead center. So dead center is something you want to avoid when you're doing portrait, or you've got a very strong subject matter in your image, a bird, so to speak. Just remember that rule of thirds. So that's key. But isolation of your subject to try to get rid of all the distractions is another principle about framing. It's all about eliminating things that are distracting to the eye when you want to capture an image that has a subject matter that is the key or the principal part of your image. So framing is something that you can practice and you can never really master. It's something that you always work on.
What can you tell us about computer software, backing up, processing, and editing?
So the fun part, and I'm guilty of this, is I love taking the photos, but then there's the other side of digital photography, is downloading your images to your computer and using software to process those images. One of the things I like about my Canon is it shoots what's called raw image. So it's a unfiltered, modified image, what the digital sensor sees. I bring that image into photography software, and then at that point I can make adjustments in the exposure, the color balance, the lighting, all those sorts of things without having to start from something that's been modified, what we call as a JPEG image. It's been modified by the camera. So you have less ability to make changes to that photo. Once you've taken your photos, you've got your digital media, and you come home and you want to download those images. The software I use is Lightroom. It's made by Adobe. It's a really good editing and processing software package. It's fairly inexpensive and it works really well. So you can do minor editing of your photos. You can sort photos. You can label. You can put tags on it. It's amazing the amount of information that you can assign to photos, and it's really to keep your photos organized. The other software that is very popular is Adobe Photoshop, and I have really never used Photoshop much. It's for the very creative minds, and anyway, it's a very prominent and somewhat user-friendly, but again, it takes practice and study and tutorials to really get good at that. So those are one aspect of photography that you need to become disciplined at. Otherwise, you've got hundreds and hundreds of images that are unnecessary, and they clog up your system, and it makes it hard to find things. So not only taking photos, but processing them and making sure that you are managing those to find the ones you want later on, 1, 2, 3, 5 years later. The other thing that's very important is backing up your images. So I had, quite a while ago, I had taken a bunch of photos of my kids when they were very young, and one day I was just sitting at my computer and it just quit working. The hard drive failed catastrophically without any warning whatsoever. I lost over 1,000 pictures because I didn't have a backup at the time. Even took the hard drive into a computer store and they said, nope, the data is unrecoverable. So all those pictures are gone now. And I regret it because I didn't have a backup. So a backup system like an external hard drive or another hard drive in your computer are key, or uploading them to the cloud, so to speak, is another method of doing a backup. So processing, backing up are key components to establishing and developing your portfolio of your photos. So I wanted to take this opportunity to show kind of a setup that I'm going to explain what I'm looking at, what I'm doing here, and what I've got. So I've got my sturdy tripod. I've got my camera mounted on what's called a ball head, and I recommend these because they're great. They can move all around. One of the things I didn't mention is that to get a level shot, you want to make sure your horizon's level. They make these things that are bubble levels, and you stick them in your hot shoe for your flash. But my camera and most other ones, probably the digital SLRs, have a built-in level. So you want to make sure that you've got your camera level for the horizon, because you don't want to have your ocean shot with the ocean tipping. So that's an important aspect. So here on the patio, it's 11:30. Absolutely the wrong time, but for our video purposes, we're here at this time and we're going to take a shot. So I'm looking down on the Deschutes River here, just above the old mill. I see a bridge over here on the left. I have a nice aspen tree here with a little bit of changing color. The leaves are a little bit dead on one spot, so it might not be perfect. But what I want to shoot is frame the river and a kayaker down on the river. So I want to tighten in, maybe have a little bit of foliage around the image, but my key is going to be a kayaker on the river with a bright colored boat, and again in a third part of the frame, not dead center. Remember, dead center is deadly. You want a third or some off to the side so that you have a length, or you can see motion through the photo from the kayak. So we just set up here, you get things going, and you check your aperture. You're going to want to, in light like this, you're going to want like an f8 and f5.6, somewhere in that range. You can even go to f11 if you want. Get depth of field, so you have a lot of depth of field, and then crop in on that image of that kayaker down on the river. So you've got a really nice setting here. But if I was going to do this for real, meaning that I wanted a good shot, I'd probably be out here at about 7 o'clock the next morning and taking a look at things. And hopefully somebody's out on the river at 7 a.m. in the morning. But this is Bend, and I'm sure somebody would be. So this is kind of a setup right here that you would see a photographer doing for a scenic photo, a landscape photo.
If someone wants to learn more, what are your favorite resources?
So over the years, I think taking a class or two at the local community college, or I don't know if this is still done anymore, but I went out on field trips with professors from the college about photography. And you're in a group of people that are enjoying and enthusiastic about photography. You can bounce ideas off of other people. You can see what they do, what their ideas are. And then you've got that formal instruction by the professional or the professor about photography. So I learned a lot that way. So online is something that is key. There's a website called Luminous Landscape. They charge $1 a month to have a subscription to this website, and it is filled with information about camera gear, photography, light, all aspects of photography. It is amazing. The guy that started the website actually has passed away since he started it, but it's been in place for 20 years, and there's just all kinds of good information there. So if you want to learn about cameras and the technical details, if you're a pixel peeper that needs to know about what the camera specs are, there's a website called DP Review. So it's Digital Photography Review.com, but it's dpreview.com is where you go in it, and you can do all kinds of searches on old cameras, current models, new camera news, and then they also have little articles about photography and their evaluation of lenses and cameras. So that's a great site. And then, believe it or not, photography magazines are great places to take a look. But over the years, I have used all different kinds of information, classes, online, magazines, books, just really engulfed myself in photography and learning all aspects of it. But one of the things that really is probably the best teacher is just getting out and taking photos yourself and learning about your camera, learning how it works, you know, what aspects that you like. Some people like portrait photography, some people like street photography where you're trying to be subtle, you're trying to be behind the scenes so that your subject matter, they act natural, so you're not intruding into their life. So architecture, all kinds of things. So the sky's the limit when it comes to photography, but just remember to have your camera with you. You can't take a photo if you don't have your camera, so it's important that you have a camera that you like, you feel comfortable with, and that you carry around with you. So, you know, photography is a passion of mine. I just love doing it because it gets you out in the field. You get to see things that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily see. Although, you know, getting up in the dark and driving out in the cold, and, you know, that's not that fun. But the excitement of getting the image and being out there with no one else around, and you know that, hey, you're the only one that got this shot today. These conditions, nobody else has it. It's yours. And it's that's a really great feeling. So, you know, getting out and enjoying photography, all aspects, it's enjoyed by many people. So you wouldn't be alone. You can make friends, learn from other people. Just really embrace it as something that you know, you can do anytime. And the costs can be very little, or they can be really expensive. Just depends on what you really are interested in, how much you want to spend. So. Hey, anytime you have a question or something, feel free to contact me. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and get out there and take some shots.